Welcome all to the Huddle session. This is our 16th session, and we are not talking about a direct clinical topic. We are talking about something which is related to us as a cardiologist and doctors, but not directly in the clinical front. We are talking about drug quality. We did that about 2 weeks ago, where I had my guest, Mr. Dinesh Thakur, and Dr. Harry Lever. And with a huge demand, Dinesh has joined us again for the second session, where we are going to continue this discussion more from the Indian perspective of how drugs are marketed and what doctors should really know when they are prescribing any drug. For that, Dinesh is there with us. Dinesh Thakur, I introduced him to you guys last time. He is a public health activist. He worked with Bristol Myers Squibb earlier. He worked with Ranbaxy before. And then subsequently in various forms as a CEO in Skyformis. He is currently running a Thakur Foundation. He had won multiple awards, including the Whistleblower of the Year award in 2013. And he probably knows more about how the pharmaceuticals work in India than anybody else. So thank you, Dinesh, for joining us. He's joining us from St. Petersburg, Florida. So thank you and good morning there, I believe.
Thank you, Anup. That's very kind of you. I mean, you've made me, you've given me a really nice introduction. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it. The way that I thought, we would spend this time, Anup, is, maybe what I can do is just briefly talk about some key high-level issues, and then maybe have an opportunity for a question and answer kind of thing, right? That way, I will also learn a few things from the audience that you have, and we can have that discussion. So, I think last time when we spoke, Harry was talking about looking at it purely from a clinical point of view. As a practitioner, what were his challenges, right? And his perspective is primarily from a U.S. point of view. What I want to do is just take maybe 10 minutes or so to describe to you what the scenario in India is. And I don't know how many of you really understand, or they're even sort of given to understand this kind of situation, and how it impacts your ability to do the work that you're doing, right? So that is what I was hoping to do. Maybe just use the first 10-15 minutes, and then we'll have a discussion around what works, what doesn't work. I mean, my experience also is limited, in the sense that to the extent that I know, I can talk about what I have been able to do, right? But I'm not a clinician, I'm not a doctor, so I can't speak from a clinician's point of view. But I can speak from a point of view of somebody who's worked in developing drugs and how things are different in India, right? So let me, so what I want to do is just talk a little bit about some nomenclature, right? So when we talk about branded versus generic in India, how is that different from, the terminology that is used overseas in Europe and in the United States? Then I want to talk about our regulations, in terms of how our regulations are a little bit different compared to what is accepted overseas. Then let's talk a little bit about advertisement, right? So we'll talk a little bit about how promotions are made and how, practitioners and clinical practitioners are educated with either new therapies or existing therapies for initial indications. Let's talk about that. And the last thing let's talk about is the enforcement aspects of it. What really happens when there is a recall, for example. So those are the four things that I thought maybe, I'll just take a couple of minutes to talk about, and then we'll open it up, and then we'll have a discussion around anything in these four or anything else that your audience would want to talk about. Does that sound okay?
That sounds perfect, Dinesh. I think floor is yours. Please take us through this.
Okay. So when we talk about branded versus generic in India, right, for us, brand necessarily means promotion. So when we talk about brand, if a pharma company essentially spends money promoting, a name for a drug, that is what we call brand in India. That is what is called a branded drug, right? And when we talk about the generic drug, if any of your patients go to what are called Jan Aushadhi stores, right? These are the stores that the government of India set up that basically sell drugs basically based on the salt form of the drug. They don't have any money behind them in terms of promoting anything. That is what we call generic in India. the definition of brand and generic is very different outside of India. And when you step outside of India, brand basically means a drug that is currently still under patent. So, a pharma company invents a particular drug, right? They get a patent of 17 years for that drug. In that 17 years, they are the only ones who can actually make it. Once the patent expires, then it becomes public property in the sense that anybody who has the qualifications to make that drug, they can go ahead and make it. That is the definition of a brand and generic outside of India. What happened in our case, this is a little bit of history. If you think back, historically, what had happened was in the 1970s, during emergency, right after emergency, we essentially got rid of what was called, product patent. So if you think about patent, right, any new innovation you make, there are two different kinds of patents that are granted. One is called product patent. The other one is called a process patent. A product patent basically says that, if you, like, for example, make a new cell phone, right, a new way of sort of using the cell technology to communicate, you can say that you can demonstrate to the patent office and say, this is new, this has never been, invented before, and here is the way, this is new, in the sense that if you can say that I don't need cell towers, I can make communication happen by, different mechanism, then you can say that is a new way of doing it. And if the patent office says that is in fact a new way of doing it, they'll give you a product patent. The second thing is what is called a process patent. The process patent basically says that if you can make the same product, right, the same chip that goes into your cell phone by a different method, right, then you can get a process patent. So these are the two kinds of patents. So India in 1970s, we got rid of a product patent, and we basically we got rid of the process patent. We said that if you can make the same drug in a different way, you're allowed to sell, right? So until about mid-1990s, this is how our market essentially became, very big in the generic terms, because as long as you could produce the same drug in a different way, you were still protected. I mean, in the sense that you did not infringe on somebody else's patent. And that is how our generic industry came about. And that's how, we talk about generic drugs versus, branded drugs. So when a medical representative from a pharma company comes into your office to sell, they are promoting a drug, right? That is what is called brand within our country. Sorry, somebody had a question?
No, Dinesh, you can go ahead. You can go ahead.
And sure. Yeah, and then when you're writing a prescription, when you write a salt, on the prescription, then obviously you're writing a salt for a generic version of that particular drug. So that is the difference between brand and unbranded medications, generic medications in India. When you come into the United States or when you go to Europe and when you talk about a brand, it's typically a drug that is under patent. Why does it matter to us, right? Because there's a lot of confusion about this. If you remember 2 years ago, Prime Minister Modi basically said that we want all doctors to write generic medications, right? So what did he really mean? When he say we want to write generic medication, he was basically saying that we want you to write medications that are not promoted. He wasn't talking about, the way generic medicines are normally sort of classified when you go to Europe and the United States. So that is the difference between India and the US. India and any country outside of India, in the way that we think about brand versus non-branded drugs. So that's one. The second thing let's talk a little bit about is our regulations. We spoke about this briefly last time. If you think about how a generic version of a drug is approved, right? So when a pharma company develops a new drug, if you think about your medical school days, pharmacology 101, the way that you measure a drug's efficacy is through dose response, right? So you give a drug and you see what kind of response do you get to that dose, right? So when you think about clinical studies, phase 1 is essentially determining what is the right dose that gets you a dose response, right? After you do animal model toxicology test non-clinically, the first thing that you do is figure out what is the right dose that gives you the dose response, right? That's the key aspect of it. And then you obviously do, safety, how many, adverse events and efficacy of that particular drug, benefit risk ratio. when the root governing regulation for generic drugs is that globally accepted is that you can have a variation of between 80 to 120%. So so there are two parameters when you think about dose response, right? When you give somebody a medicine that they take, it goes into the gut, it dissolves in gut acid, it permeates into the bloodstream, and then you'll see a concentration of that particular molecule in the bloodstream. And after a period of time, your ADME processes, like your kidneys, your skin, essentially excrete that stuff out of your body, right? So at a certain point in time, the concentration of that particular molecule in our bloodstream is the highest. So that's called the Cmax. And, when you plot it, when you make a graph, I had sent a paper out, I know probably sent it to you already. This was a paper that we had written in the Cell magazine explaining exactly how this thing works. So the variation that was tolerated, that is tolerated globally is minus 20% to plus 15%. So let's say if the 100 milligram ibuprofen gives you 100 milligram of ibuprofen in your bloodstream, a generic version of ibuprofen can have anywhere from 80 milligram to 115 milligrams of ibuprofen in your bloodstream at Cmax. That is the essential standard that we have globally accepted. Now in India, we allow for 30% variation. So we say that, if you consume a 100 milligram IP tablet, remember, when you buy a medicine, on the blister pack it says, the active ingredient IP, meaning Indian Pharmacopoeia standardized, right? So if the packaging says it's 100 milligrams, it can contain anywhere from 70 to 130 milligrams of drug in it. That is what our standards in India allow. So our governing act in India is the Drugs and Cosmetics Act, which was written in 1945, even before independence. And that has never been sort of fundamentally rewritten. We've been adding, band-aids to it over a period of time. Whenever we find a problem, we write an amendment to it. And so it's become very, very unwieldy. But the bigger problem we have is that, our variation that is accepted in our drug supply goes from, 70% to 130%. Now, why do we care about this? For many drugs, it really doesn't matter. Like, for example, if you're prescribing an antibiotic, right? Antibiotic basically kills whatever pathogen is in your bloodstream. When you take it, it really doesn't matter. But when you're dealing with what are called narrow therapeutic dosage drugs, so for example, if you're looking at any drugs that deal with central nervous system, this SSRI, dopamine and serotonin inhibitors. If you're looking at hormone regulation drugs like levothyroxine, right? Anything to do with this kind of drugs that are called or organ transplant rejection drugs, for example. These are called narrow therapeutic dosage drugs, and the reason why they're called that is because even small changes in Cmax have a significant effect in the therapeutic efficacy, right? So when you're dealing with these class of drugs, the variation.
Give me 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we are clean. Someone might.
Yeah.
Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah. The variation that we see, even small amounts of variation in the total, active ingredient in those drugs causes major issues in our therapeutic efficacy, right? So that is the bigger problem that we have. So, it's very important not to make broad statements that all drugs have this problem. No, not all drugs have this problem. It's only the narrow therapeutic dosage drugs have this problem, and it's partly because our regulations are much looser compared to what is globally accepted. So that's number one. Number two, the reason why we have a challenge is that health is a state subject under Indian Constitution. So each state essentially has its own regulatory authority in the way they provide licenses for drug manufacturing. Now think about where most of the drugs are made, right? Most of the active ingredient is manufactured in and around Hyderabad, in the old Andhra Pradesh, basically. That's where most of the API drug manufacturing is, or some in Chennai as well. But most of the formulation is up, in the north, in Himachal Pradesh. And the reason for that was basically HP offers, Himachal Pradesh has tax incentives. They have set up these, SEZs, which essentially manufacture this drug up, there, and it's distributed all over the country. Now, why is this a problem? The reason this is a problem is because those manufacturing facilities are regulated by the state. So, for example, if you find a drug that is problematic in Bangalore, in Karnataka, through your drug inspectors, those drug inspectors work for the state of Karnataka, right? They are not able to do anything to the manufacturing facility up in Himachal Pradesh. The least that they can do is they can write a letter to the HP drug controller saying, we found a drug which is out of specification, do something about it. And 9 out of 10 times, the drug regulator in Himachal Pradesh just kind of files that letter in a nice drawer and forgets about it. So structurally, we have a lot of problems with what we are seeing. Now, I'll just give you a very simple example. In February of this year, we had a case where, cough syrup manufactured by a company in Himachal Pradesh, the company was called Digital Vision. It was consumed by children in Jammu, and 9 children died. And the reason they found out was because they had substituted, ethylene glycol, which is essentially an excipient in that, you make the cough mixture, with diethylene glycol, which is antifreeze. And so after those 9 children died, obviously there was a lot of newspaper reporting and people sat up and said, this is not acceptable. Why is this happening? And, the state regulator said, we'll file an FIR against this company. And that was the end of it. Now, in July, like 2 weeks ago, there was another case of another child that is admitted at PGIM here in Chandigarh with renal failure after consuming exactly the same drug of the same batch. Now imagine, this happened in February, 9 children died. The state regulator said that we are going to recall this product from the market. Clearly, they were not able to do that because, the child who consumed, the same cough syrup is now admitted for treatment with renal failure at PGI Chandigarh, right? So, we don't have proper regulatory systems in the country that actually enforce this. And the trouble that we see 9 out of 10 times is it's very difficult. I mean, these are the extreme cases, right? When people die or, you have renal failure. 9 out of 10 times for drugs that are prescribed for chronic diseases, you don't know whether it's the progression of disease that is causing it or if it is a bad quality drug, right? We don't have an ability to actually study these. Nobody has studied this in the long term and longitudinally. So we can say that taking statins, bad quality statins for, years on end, does it really produce the benefit that we are talking about, if you don't have proper active ingredient in that particular drug that you're taking, right? So that is another issue that we have that we really need to deal with when it comes to our drug supply. The last thing that I want to talk a little bit about is advertisements, right? We have this thing called the Drug Advertisement and Magic Remedies Act. This was again written, before we became independent. And it's primarily written from a prudish point of view in the sense that it is not consistent with the way, advertisements work, overseas in the sense that proper disclosure, role of conflicts of interest and things of that nature. We have nothing of that sort in the country that forces pharmaceutical manufacturers who send medical representatives to your offices trying to sell the most recent drug that they have innovated, right? I mean, part of the information they need to communicate is that if they have hired key opinion leaders whose opinion is shaping the kind of claims that are being made by that drug, those things need to be disclosed. When they run an advertisement on television, for Chyawanprash or Coronel or whatever it is that they're running on TV, they need to have truth in advertisement in the sense that, has that been scientifically proven in a clinical study? We have no laws like that. So people can make all kinds of claims, pharma companies or even, individual people who, practicing, people who are vested in promoting a certain, therapy, they can make claims without having any liability or legal liability of it. So these are some systemic challenges that we have in the country that we really need to think about and try to make changes in order to make sure that the drug supply that you as physicians prescribe to your patients do what it is intended to do, right? I mean, it's difficult enough to try and diagnose and treat patients properly. This adds one more variable that you have to worry about in your practice of medicine. So that is mostly where my work is focused on today, to try and make a change in our Drugs and Cosmetics Act, in the Drug Advertisement and Magic Remedies Act, to try and get the government to change these to make them consistent with ICH 7, which is the globally acceptable norm at this point in time, so that as practicing physicians, you don't have to worry about the quality of what you're prescribing to your patients. So I'll stop there. I think it's about 20 minutes into the call, and now we can have a discussion on any topic that you'd like to have.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dinesh. And I would request my attendees, if you have any questions, you can unmute yourself or you can raise your hand. And while you think of the question, I'll just follow up on some of the things, Dinesh, that you said. So 80% to 125% of the API is acceptable when you compare it with the innovator drug, and that is 90% of the time. So the confidence interval for that is that 90% of the time they should fit into 80 to 125%.
Correct.
What happens to that other 10%? So that other 10%, so the drug can be anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically what happens is that, remember the way that the process is supposed to work, right? Before you ship a batch to the market, pharma company is supposed to test that batch. So they take a sample. Let's say if they manufacture, 1 lakh tablets in a particular batch. They're supposed to statistically draw 5 samples from that batch and test it, and see, whether, the amount of API falls within that 80 to 125. If it does not, they're not supposed to ship that batch to the market, right? So that's number one. So every batch of drug that is shipped to the market is accompanied by a legal document. It's called the Certificate of Analysis. And the pharma company is supposed to actually provide the Certificate of Analysis to the stockist and what we call a super stockist, to the wholesaler who buys it from the pharma company and distributes it to the local pharmacy, the chemist shop that we buy the drug from. They are not supposed to ship that drug if their pre-marketing testing fails. Now, how do you enforce that, right? How do you enforce that actually happens? And that is the big issue that we have. We don't have the ability to enforce these things. So the way that we test for quality in India is that each state has drug inspectors, and they're supposed to go to the market and they're supposed to actually draw samples from the market. So they go to a chemist shop, they buy, sample of a particular drug. They, and then they send that sample over to what are called regional drug testing laboratories. And if the regional drug testing laboratory tests it and says this falls within specification, that's good. If it fails that specification, then they're supposed to issue a recall. That is the process, but it doesn't work because, number one, there are no budgets. I mean, the drug inspectors are given very little money to purchase these drugs. Number two is that there is a lot of fraud that goes on between the drug inspector and the manufacturing company, so that even if they find something that is bad, they hush it up. It really doesn't get to the point where it's affected a recall. So that is typically what happens in these areas.
Thank you. My other question is, what is this IP versus USP? Indian pharmacopoeia versus US pharmacopoeia?
Yeah, good. Very good. Very good question. And so this is something that's very important for us to understand. So for example, let's say that you prescribe, one of the sartans to your patient, right? Let's say if you prescribe valsartan or irbesartan, you write a prescription saying 20 milligrams, irbesartan, right? How do you know that the drug actually contains 20 milligrams irbesartan? The way that you do that is, as I said, the manufacturer of irbesartan is supposed to test their formulation before they ship it to the super stockist. The way that they test it is they compare their formulation to a standard that you buy from the pharmacopoeia. Right? The pharmacopoeia gives you a sample that says, when you test yours, compare it to this one, because this one we know is 20 milligrams. That is what the pharmacopoeia is. Now, there are 3 pharmacopoeias in the world. There's USP, United States Pharmacopoeia, there's British Pharmacopoeia, and there's Indian Pharmacopoeia. Our formulations that are sold in India are supposed to be tested against Indian Pharmacopoeia. And that is what IP means. So when you buy, for example, paracetamol, 100 milligram paracetamol, how do you know it contains 100 milligram paracetamol? The way that you know that is you compare, GlaxoSmithKline's version of 100 milligrams paracetamol against the standard that IP gives you. And if they are comparable, then you say it's 100 milligrams. If it's less than that, you say it's, it falls within the 80 or 125, range that you have the ability to do that. The problem with what we have with IP is, compared to USP and BP, IP does not have as many monographs, meaning the standards that they can actually supply to the industry. IP is really, really behind in, maintaining the right kind of standards for what we actually have, in our drug supply. Not just that, IP typically copies their monographs from USP and BP. And as you said last time, Anoop, we have a very unique characteristic in our drug supply, fixed dose combinations, right? These are combinations of 2 or more active ingredients. Now, these things don't exist anywhere outside the world. So, there is no monograph, there is no standard against which you can measure the purity of a fixed dose combination, because there is nothing like a monograph for a fixed dose combination. So these are some systemic issues that we have within our country. IP is something that we don't pay attention to because it works behind the scenes, but it is very poorly resourced to provide standards to the industry to compare their product with.
So is it fair to say that out of the 2 drugs, if one is, let's say, atorvastatin 20 IP versus atorvastatin 20 USP, is it fair to say that USP is a better quality drug, or that's too simplistic of an?
No. So if you say 20 milligram USP, all you're saying is that you're measuring against standard that USP provides. It says nothing about the quality at all. The quality of the drug is in the certificate of analysis. That, remember, I told you what every drug manufacturer is supposed to send this legal document along with each batch of the drug. That document contains this information. So it contains what is called an assay. Assay is basically how much active ingredients is available. It says 20 milligram atorvastatin. It will tell you, it is 18 milligrams or 22 milligrams of it. It also will contain information about dissolution. So, for example, it will tell you when you take the 20 milligram atorvastatin molecule, how long does it take for it to dissolve in gut acid, right? That's number 2. Number 3 is it will give you what all excipients are there in that formulation. Remember, atorvastatin by itself, because it's a crystalline substance, it doesn't take itself in the form of a tablet or a capsule. You'll have to add binders to it in order to make it look like capsule. Right? It'll tell you what binders are present and what is the extent of those binders in there, right? All of this information is, on the certificate of analysis, and just saying that on the blister pack, saying that, it contains 20 milligram atorvastatin that is not an indication of quality at all. It is just saying it is measured against that USP standard. That's it.
And where do we as a physician can find the certificate of analysis?
So this is the role of the regulator. This is the role of the CDSCO, the Central Drugs Control Standard Organization. They are supposed to be providing this on their website, and they don't do that. Okay.
And the second question is, how do we know that this certificate is genuine? Because I'm sure they are generated by the companies themselves, who can write whatever they want to.
That is another problem.
That's another problem.
Okay. So, one of the issues that we have is that our legal enforcement of these is very poor. So, for example, even when we find out that what they claim on certificate of analysis is not accurate, many of these companies are not actually prosecuted because, our legal system doesn't understand this. The judges don't understand, what the importance of this is. And so typically what happens is they're made to pay a fine of 5,000 rupees, and that's it. They go on, doing what they're doing. Even when, they're found out to be fudging data on the certificate of analysis. So that is an area also we need to pay attention to improve our prosecution standards. When pharma companies intentionally misrepresent information, there have to be more, penal consequences for them.
So, Dinesh, I think that a lot of us, what the questions that we have pertain to what we actually do to the patient rather than what is happening in the lab.
Correct.
So let me ask you
Correct.
some practical questions which are also posted
Sure.
in the chat box here, and then you
Yeah.
can tell us the insight of it. So
Yeah.
Apixaban is an anticoagulant molecule
Sure.
released few years ago and still under patent with the brand name of Eliquis.
Yeah.
Eliquis in India is available at 73 rupees per tablet.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think Eliquis is from your old company, Dinesh, if I remember correctly.
BMS.
BMS, yes, BMS made this company.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Natco Pharma in India is branding the same medicine under the brand name of Epigat, which sells at 30 rupees per tablet, which is less, which is like 40% of the Eliquis cost.
Correct.
And Eliquis is still under patent.
Correct.
So, can I prescribe Epigat to the patient? What is your insight? Because to me, if I can prescribe Epigat with the confidence that now I'm saving a lot of money to the patient.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it should work that way, right? So if a cheaper alternative is available in the market and you have the confidence that the cheaper alternative is equivalent, bioequivalent to Apaxiban, you should prescribe the cheaper equivalent, right? But here's the question, right? When Natco's product was approved by the CDSCO, they should have done their due diligence in Natco's ability to make that molecule, right? Because remember, until the drug is under patent, it's the process by which the drug is made is not public. The moment it goes off patent is when pharmacopoeias essentially publish methods for analysis, right? So when Apaxiban goes off patent 2 or 3 years down the road, USP and BP will publish, methods for testing and validation of how Apaxiban could be tested in the pharmacopoeia. So the question now is, how did Natco develop this particular molecule? What process did it apply? What methods are they using to check the purity of Apaxiban in the product that they're selling? This is something that the regulator, the CDSCO, is supposed to be doing. Now, the question here is that, if CDSCO has given approval, Natco would not be able to sell without CDSCO's approval, right? So if CDSCO has given approval, then, we have to assume, because that's the country's drug regulator, that they have actually looked at Natco's process. They understand that Natco is capable of producing Apaxiban in the same or similar way to what BMS does. And because our country's laws provide for this to happen, this is happening legitimately. The question that you're asking is, how does a physician have the confidence that Natco's product produces the same therapeutic efficacy as BMS's Eliquis? That is the question you're asking. I don't have an answer for that. Because the point here is that the regulator is responsible for doing this. I am trusting that regulator to do its job, right? So if the regulator has done its job and they're saying that the cheaper alternative produced by Natco meets all the standards of dissolution, assay, impurity profile, then by all means, the Natco's product should be as good as BMS's product. But there is no way that anybody can tell you as a physician that with confidence you can prescribe this.
So can I ask for a certificate of analysis from that Natco pharma guy who comes to my room to sell Epigat? Can I ask him that give me certificate of analysis for your drug?
Absolutely. You should be able to do that. Yeah.
And is it realistically possible for him to reproduce that document to me, or is it all too theoretical?
No. So it's a very simple document. Basically, what it says is, if you look at a certificate analysis, right, there's only 5 or 6 things listed on it. It basically says, how did they do the assay? What is the range? It's like, so it looks very similar to, for example, if you go to a path lab and you get your blood test done, right? What does the report say? The report says that, this is the test that they did. This is the range of result values you're supposed to find, and this is what you found. Right? And whether this value is within this range or not. That is exactly what a certificate of analysis is.
And
the question is and the question here is that, remember, for every batch there is a new certificate, right? So, for example, if your patient goes to, whatever the local pharmacy is and actually gets NATCO's product today, they will get one batch, whatever that batch number is. And they buy 2 strips or 3 strips of the product. And after they finish 2 or 3 strips, they go back to the same pharmacy. They may not get the same batch, right? The batch would have been sold out completely. They give you a different batch. With each batch, they will have the certificate of analysis, right? So you can, so the medical rep who comes to you from NATCO, that person will have to provide to you for each batch of that drug, which is very cumbersome. The company will have this information, right? But if you want, you can ask for it, and they should certainly, because they are providing this to the regulator. They are providing it to CDSCO for every batch of the drug that is shipped to the wholesaler, the stockist. They're sending a copy of this document to the CDSCO. So they have a copy of it, and your medical rep should be able to provide it to you.
And the retail pharmacy, they don't necessarily ask for this. They don't really care about what is the quality of drug.
No, they don't. Most of the retail pharmacists are not even qualified pharmacists, Anup. That's the problem that we have, right? Most of the people who run pharmacies, they're not even qualified as pharmacists. They don't know what they're doing. I mean, you write a prescription, they will look up the name of the prescription that you've written, and they'll sell it to you. They're ill-equipped and ill-qualified to even sort of answer this kind of question.
One of the questions which is asked in the chat box is how is it possible for a company to sell the same molecule, same company to sell same molecule with 2 different brand names and two different pricing structure? How is that happening?
Yeah. Because our laws allow it. And if you look at remember I mentioned to you about the the Drug Advertisement and Magic Remedies Act. We don't have a method by which somebody actually looks carefully at the brand name that they're selling and approves it. So what happens in all other countries, right? Before you actually claim a brand name, there is a process by which your proposed brand name is evaluated. So, for example, if I'm a pharma company and I have a formulation, I want it to call whatever, it doesn't matter, some name I want to call it. The way it works is that name is evaluated by the regulator to say that does it match with something that's already on the market? Is it similar to something that's already in the market? Because we don't want consumers to get confused between these two, right? And then that name is approved for them to be able to sell. What happens in India is we don't have that process in place. So once the CDSCO says that you can sell this drug, the company makes up that name, and there's no regulatory process to review that name. And what happens is that, because there are multiple channels of sale, right? So pharma companies sell to the pharmacies associated with large corporate hospitals at a significant discounted rate compared to what they sell on to the open market, right? So it is in their interest to label that same product in 2 different ways, because you don't want people to ask questions. Why are you selling this at a rate that is sold at a pharma associated with one of the large hospitals different than what I can buy from open pharmacy, open market? You don't want people to ask that questions. You call them 2 different names, and we don't have regulatory structure in the country to review this and enforce companies to be able to stay consistent with what product that they are selling. This is one of the bigger loopholes that we have within our law. Hello? Hello?
Yeah, sorry, Dinesh, I was muted. So the regulations that you mentioned for the drugs, do the food products like infant formula and all these, do they also have to go through the same process? Are the rules the same for them?
Correct. For every product that we have, right? Yeah. So they are, but unfortunately, they're not strictly enforced, right? This is the reason why we see same or similar names of products made by 2 different manufacturers. That should never happen, right? You should not confuse, drug A with a similar sounding name for drug B. But we don't have a regulatory structure in the country that actually, ensures that doesn't happen.
Okay. One other question that came is, whenever, one of the common things which I also got amazed when I came back here is that when I used to talk to the pharma guys, they wouldn't necessarily talk about the chemical composition of it. They would more talk about how they used an innovative technique to make that drug. Like they used this film technology, or they put this some magic technology to make it better. So the question here is, whenever they use a new technology, do they have to retest the drug? Is it a rule to retest, or can market it without testing?
No. So here is the thing, right? Remember I talked to you about the certificate of analysis?
Right.
The law says that it doesn't matter how you make the drug, right? What technology you employ in making the drug. What the law says is that before you ship the product to the market, you're supposed to test it, and here are the specifications of the product you're supposed to meet, right? You're supposed to have certain amount of active ingredient. You have to have certain kind of dissolution time, so that once you take that drug, it actually becomes bioavailable once it goes into your gut, or once it's injected parentally, it becomes bioavailable in your body. These are the kind of impurities that are acceptable, because we add excipients to make the drug product. So what is the level of impurities that is acceptable? They do not specify how you make that drug. They don't care, how you make that drug. So the pharma company may use that as a marketing strategy to say, we are using this technology or that technology. I'll give you a very simple example. They'll say that we have an antara-coated beads within our product so that it disintegrates faster and becomes bioavailable faster within the gut acid, and that's the reason why our product is better than this other product. That could very well be true, but as long as it is within the specification of dissolution, why do you care, right? If dissolution specification says within 20 minutes it needs to become bioavailable in your gut acid, what technology they use to create antara-coated beads, it's irrelevant to you as a physician. Right. So it's a marketing strategy of how companies use to try and then get you to prescribe their product.
Right. One more question is, the same Eliquis which is sold in US and the same Eliquis which is sold in India, I'm guessing BMS is not marketing that Eliquis in India. I'm just guessing that. Is that correct?
No. Correct.
Yeah. So in that case, is it fair to say that the brand Eliquis in India is of the same quality as the brand Eliquis in US?
No, this is a broad statement, right? You're asking me whether the quality of drug sold by BMS under a license in India, right? So BMS is not selling; it's probably licensed it to an Indian company to do that. Is it the same quality of drug that is available in the US? The answer is no, because our laws do not require that. I just told you that, we are okay with a 70 to 130% variation in API in the product that is sold in India. Even if BMS is selling it in India, they will follow Indian regulations, right? They will not follow US regulations. They will not have 80 to 125. They will have 70 to 130.
Okay. But the marketing company in India, are they getting the tablets from BMS, or they're making it themselves in India?
No. It's made in India. It's made in India. The marketing company in India, it is making it in India. You can't sell a liquid that is manufactured, and then sold by BMS for the price that you have in India, even the branded drug.
Okay. So even the branded under patent drug with the same brand name, what they call it as the original molecule.
Exactly.
It's made in India.
Exactly.
Because if
you look at the packaging, it will tell you, Anup. If you look at the blister pack or the package insert that comes with it, right, it will tell you where it's made.
Because lot of drug company guys, they would come to us to say that, sir, ours is the original molecule which was tested in the trial, so we are the best quality. But what you are saying is that original molecule was made in somewhere else. It was not made in India.
Yeah, so next time a pharma rep tells you that, ask him to give you the blister pack or the packaging of that product. And by law in India, they are supposed to disclose where the product is made. So you can ask the person to read out where the product is made, and you'll know.
Okay. That is another eye-opening. So because we used to always think that whenever there is, like for instance, Magnex Fort is a standard brand for ceftriaxone that we use as an IV antibiotic. So whenever we have sick patient, we tell very clearly that we don't want any other brand. We want only Magnex Fort so that it works. But what you are saying is that even that Magnex Fort, the molecule is made in India. So we don't know the quality of that, right?
Correct. But see, here's the thing. I mean, this is where I think your experience as a physician becomes very important, right? If you have been using a certain brand that is made in India and you're seeing consistently good results, at least you have a data point to rely on, right? That is the only thing that I can tell you is that if you're using a certain, product made by a certain company and you're consistently seeing good results, stick with it. But don't buy this notion that somehow because it's a patented molecule, it is made someplace else. It is made in India.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask Okay, there is one more question. Is it possible? I'm just reading the question loud. Is it possible to get the drugs which are manufactured outside India for someone who wants to buy in India? So can I buy a US-made drug in India? Is it legally possible? Is it legally allowed?
You can. Yeah, you can. So there is a provision in law that allows you to purchase drugs that are manufactured overseas. It's called, under compassionate use, but you have to justify why you're buying it. So you have to make an application under the existing compassionate rules. And the question is going to be asked is why are you buying it from the US when the same molecule is available in India? If you're able to convince the regulator that there's a good reason why you're doing that, they will allow you to purchase medicine from the US.
Okay, you can't just buy it off the shelf. You just can't buy it online and get it delivered to your house. That you can't do.
No, I mean, if somebody's traveling, like for example, if you come here and you go back, you can carry it as a personal prescription, right? But not in bulk. Not in bulk, right? You can take maybe a month's supply of a particular capsule or tablet, but you're not going to be able to take it for 100 patients.
So a rich guy in India, he says, I only want to buy the Eliquis made by BMS. Can I get an Eliquis in India made by BMS if I'm sitting in India?
I've never tried that. I've never tried that, Anup.
Okay.
I don't know how it work. I mean, I guess you'll have to make an application to the CDSCO that I want to purchase this product that is sold over there. I don't know whether they'll allow it or not. I honestly don't know.
Done. Okay, I'll ask anybody else if you have any questions, please unmute yourself or like what you are doing, putting it in the chat box. You can put in the chat box and I'll read it aloud to you. And we have 7 more minutes for an hour, so I'll just keep discussing with Dinesh in the meantime. Dinesh, tell us about FDC a little bit because we use it so commonly, and like if you have to give some advice to the doctors, because we are not an activist, we can't be an activist, we can't just sit and demand for data and all this. We have to work with whatever we have got. So
absolutely,
if you have to advise doctors working in India in terms of what little bit precaution or change we can do to ensure that our patients are getting good quality drugs, is there a way to do it?
Yeah, so there's a larger question and there is a specific question of FDCs, right? So the larger question, Anup, is as follows. I think that, even in this country where I am right now, there are no longitudinal studies that have monitored the effect of substandard drugs on patients. There is none. And this is the reason why last time when we had Harry, right, he will get so excited about this and worked up about this that even NIH has not funded any longitudinal studies specifically for drugs like for low-dose aspirin or for, anything to do with statins. I mean, statins has become a standard of care right now. When you turn 40, 45, you're put on a low-dose statin, right? So the thing is we don't really have good data to be able to sort of say that longitudinal use of, these drugs, especially if they're not of good quality, what is the impact? So in absence of that data, what do you do, right? Clearly, I think the one conversation that I always sort of talk to when I'm speaking with the physician body is have a conversation with your patient. Say that, look, this is a problem. If you feel anything differently, don't ignore it. Okay, come talk to us. If you still see, if you're treating somebody for, hypertension and you're still seeing, issues with breathing and loss of breath, at least have a conversation so that you can think about this as a particular aspect of it. I've seen many times when, statins are manufactured by every pharma company in India, right? If you put if you put on a rosuvastatin and if you don't see the kind of outcomes that you're looking at, some doctors have essentially switched to the rosuvastatin made by a different company, and things have gotten better. Sometimes they've switched it to either simvastatin or atorvastatin, and things have gotten better. If you see incidents like this, right, please report it to the PVPI, the National Pharmacovigilance Health Center, because without data, they won't be able to do anything. There is a process for something like this. There is a National Pharmacovigilance Health Center. I know it takes a little bit of time to report, but I think it's really important because unless, physicians, you report to them, they're not going to be able to do anything with it. I mean, every time I talk to them, they say, we have no data. There are no cases. What are you talking about? So if you see something like this among your patient population, please make sure that at least, make a record of this someplace so that, we have some data to be able to make meaningful decisions on. Now, coming to the fixed dose combinations, there are cases where FDCs are extremely important, right? So, for example, if you look at, antiretrovirals, they are typically prescribed as fixed dose combinations today because, the pathogen that you're treating is refusing to respond to a single, sort of ARV drug. We look at combinations of lamivudine, stavudine, even the kind of stuff that is being used for COVID right now. People are looking at cocktails. But the majority of the FDCs that are permeated on a market are essentially a marketing thing. The reason why FDC started in India is because what we have in our country as a national list of essential medicines, which is price regulated, right? So the government says that if it is under a national list of essential medicine list, you cannot charge more for this than what is agreed upon. So pharma companies basically came up with a novel way saying that if I create an FDC that contains 2 active ingredients, I can get my product away from NLEM, so I'm not under price control. That is the reason why they do it. And honestly, many of the FDCs that are available in the market have no clinical data, 0 clinical data to support that they actually work as intended. And so I don't know what to tell you when it comes to FDCs.
So one of the questions that came up in the chat box, you briefly answered that. So the question is, what can we as a clinician do to make the system work better within our own realms of, again, as we said, we're not going to take up candlelight markers. So one thing you said is to report to NPHC more frequently.
Yeah. And the second thing is when the pharma companies send their medical reps to you, right? Now that you understand how this process works, ask for more information, right? So they're only going to tell you stuff that they want to tell you, that, oh, our process is so much better, that we have new technology that we have deployed, right? I mean, one of the reasons why they keep telling the government why they have, the large medical field, the sort of workforce out there is for continuing medical education, right? Start asking these guys questions about the fact that, how many recalls has your company affected in the last year, right? Look, every company, it doesn't matter how good they are, even the best pharma companies have recalls because, look, products are products, right? You see degradation in a specific batches. You will have recalls. If a company tells you that, we've never had a recall in our life, that's a huge red flag to me, right? Because, either they don't know what they're doing or they're lying to you. So, ask them about recalls. Ask them about, the fact that when they're telling you, that our technology is so much better, ask them, what does it mean from a patient's point of view, right? Does the technology make a difference in the quality of your drug, in the way it dissolves, in the way it becomes bioavailable, in the way that it acts in therapeutically within the body? What does it mean? I mean, you apply technology, that's your differentiation, but what does it mean to me and my patient? Ask them that, right? Yeah. So those are the kind of questions. And then report. If you see, issues like this, please maybe you can give it to one of your nurses or PA physician assistants. Report the stuff. Because the more data we have, the better argument we can make that there's something really wrong with it. Because most of the times when I go and talk to these guys, they say, what are you talking about? Nobody tells us that there's a problem. Everything is perfectly fine in the country. So why are you making all of this trouble?
Right. No, I think that reporting certainly is across the board. The data under reporting is a big problem in India, and we are part of the problem. Basically, in the patient substate or treating, as as you know very well, that the variables which are there are so many that sometimes even when things change, you always have a reason to explain that why it changed, and the change in company is not one of them. So I'll ask you one question, which I believe everybody has thought in their mind once, but I don't think they found a better person to ask. So I have you, so I'm going to ask you.
Sure.
Expiry date in the drug, in the drug blister. What does that mean? What we should know?
Yeah. So the way that I'm going to answer this question is as follows, Anup. So expiry date essentially is a marker, right? Basically it's a marker to say that your drug is stable. Remember, drugs are supposed to be stored at a certain temperature, right? So and the conditions for some drugs are photosensitive, so you can't store them in direct sunlight. Because all drugs, all chemicals and biologicals, they degrade, right? Vaccines and anything to do with monoclonal antibodies, any biologic drug is supposed to be stored at 4 degrees centigrade within the refrigerator. And even solid oral dosage forms like capsules and tablets, they will degrade because they have inactive ingredients. Over a period of time, they will break up. But the 24-month timestamp that they stamp on the blister pack that is sold in India, I can tell you, from my experience, many drugs, many solid oral dosage form drugs are still okay even after 24 months. The question here is that have they been manufactured properly? If a properly manufactured formulation, capsule or tablet is still, useful even after the expiry date that is printed on the standard 24-month date that is printed. But a lot depends upon what confidence do you have in the manufacturing process that the initial product is of good quality. That is the issue. The problem that we have in India is that we don't have a good marker for the initial product quality, and this is the reason why we see a lot of variation, right? So remember, in India, summertime, it gets really, really hot. Think about, the chemist shops in rural India that don't have refrigeration, that don't have air conditioning, that they cannot store these, chemicals in a room temperature, which is essentially 24 degrees Celsius, right? Temperature goes up to 40, 44, 44 degrees, for months on end. So you will see degradation, right? So the challenge is that it's a marker. The expiry date is a marker, but again, if you're asking me to make a generalized statement about whether all drugs are going to go bad right after that date, I will tell you it's not true. It is not true. As long as it's made properly and stored properly, many of these formulations, especially solid oral dosage ones, right? I'm not talking about injectables. I'm not talking about syrups. I'm not talking about parentals. I'm talking about tablets and capsules. They're still good after the 24-month timeline.
And if they are exposed to harsh environments like what you mentioned about rural, then you would expect them to disintegrate a bit faster, right?
Correct.
That you would expect. Okay.
If you have vaccines, if you have injectables, if you have syrups, if they're not stored at 4 degrees and if they're not reconstituted properly, they will go bad.
Okay. I have a last question, and then I will ask if audience has any other. Otherwise, we'll close after this. My last question to you, Dinesh, is: do you think that price control is one of the reasons why Indian pharma companies they don't invest too much in other stuff, or you think money is not the issue, why quality is not looked into?
No, So it's not a simple answer, Anup. I mean, I've thought about this quite a bit, right? I think if you look at our drug supply, right, the entire drug supply, all the formulations that we have in the market today, just about a third of them come under price control, are under an NLEM, right? 2/3 of our drug supply is not under price control. You can pretty much charge whatever you want. There are only, I think, a list of, I think 70 or 80 molecules that essentially are under price control at this point in time. So to make an argument that somehow price control, discourages investment in R&D is not necessarily, the data doesn't support that. My understanding, at least my experience of why we don't see innovation is different. Because, our business community expects a return in 24 months, right? So they think about investment that gives you a return back between a year to 2 years. That is our capacity for expecting a return. So when we make investments, we want to look at a factory. We want to look at, a building. We want to look at equipment. We want to be able to say, when I make an investment within, 18 to 24 months, I want to start seeing returns back. That is the mentality that we have in the country. And as well as I do, drug research doesn't happen on a 24-month, time cycle. Typical time frame for innovative drugs anywhere between 6 and 10 years, right? So our capacity to make long-term investments, it's a function of our culture, our business-mindedness. We don't have the capacity to make long-term investments. I mean, look, some of the big, pharma houses in the country, they make hundreds of crores, in profit. You can't tell them. You can't say that because their product is under the national list of essential medicines, they make less profit, right? It's a question of their intent to be able to invest for the long term. I just don't believe that we have the capability or the capacity to make investments and wait for 6 to 8 years for you to turn a return on investment, and that is a problem.
Right. If time would have permitted, we would have discussed a little bit on vaccine as well, but I think we are too far off. I'll just ask you one question. If the Russian vaccine comes to America, what do you think? Is the acceptance going to be high because of the obvious quality concern that people have?
Today I would actually, myself or for my children, give a vaccine that comes from Oxford University and European approval compared to the US FDA vaccine because of the way that the US FDA has capitulated to the Trump administration. They have lost all kinds of confidence. In our ability to produce vaccine in this country. I mean, I would not, I would think twice before I take Moderna mRNA vaccine. I mean, if it comes from, if the European Union approves it, I'll probably give it to my children first, before a US vaccine.
Because the chances are the Russian vaccine might land into India, and then the question that's going to come to us is that how confident we be prescribing that vaccine. So,
absolutely.
So you have your reservations against, I'm guessing.
I have, I mean, I haven't seen any data on the Russian vaccine, Anup. I mean, that's the problem, right? Unless you have peer-reviewed data, it's very difficult to give it to yourself, your family. I have not seen any, peer-reviewed data from the Russian studies yet.
Do you think Oxford is going to come up with that, with the quality of data that you revere for?
I think that MHRA, which is the UK regulator and European Union today, are doing a much better job of monitoring progress with the Oxford vaccine, the adenovirus vaccine that is coming out of virus in the Serum Institute in India than anything that the US FDA is doing.
And what do you think of its manufacturing in Serum Institute of India? You think that there also will have to worry about the quality as compared to AstraZeneca?
No, I think that, the Serum Institute has had a reputation of producing good quality work, and I think that right now there is so much focus on vaccine production. I think it would be stupid of anybody to try and take shortcuts, I mean, given how much attention is focused on vaccines today. I think it'd be stupid of anybody to take shortcuts. And AZ, they have the reputation at risk, right? They will not compromise, anything, with the quality of vaccine that comes out of Serum Institute.
Perfect. We are 8 minutes out into our discussion. I would ask if anybody has any other questions, they can put up in the chat box or unmute themselves. Praneeth, you have closing remarks for today's session, and then if nobody has any other question, we'll close it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, sorry. Go on.
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
No, sorry, I didn't. I mean, I was just trying to say that I think that this is not something that you can try and explore in an hour or 2 hours, right? So, if anybody in your audience has questions, I'm usually prompt on email. Feel free to write to Anup and me, and I'll be more than happy to answer the best I possibly can. I may not have all the answers, but I'll try my best to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. Thank you for those insights and sharing that knowledge. Most of the aspects were eye-opener, and as was the last discussion, today's discussion was equally amazing. It just makes me feel naked, where you just don't have anything and anywhere to go about. And also thank you for sharing that insight of what we can do as a clinician. Yes, it shows us that as a clinicians, we do also have a responsibility. working probably in tandem with people like you to make the system better. Probably one day we should feel that our system works better and our medicines are more or effective and the way they are supposed to work. Thank you so much, sir. It was really pleasure listening to you.
Thank you again, Anup and Funny for inviting me. I hope this was useful. Thanks again. Bye now.
Take care, Dinesh. Thank you so much. And good night, all of you guys here. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you next time. All the huddle sessions are recorded, and I'm trying to see how I can put them on podcast for it to be watched or downloaded later. So I'll keep you updated with it. And as always, if you have any feedback, please email it to me. I want to make it better as I can. And I want to invite people like Dinesh and others where we can discuss things which are relevant to us, but we really don't pay much attention to that. So with that, I'll close the session and thank you all for attending again. Good night, and Dinesh, have a good day to you.
Bye now.
Bye. Take care.